The cheap cardboard box felt heavier than it should. It contained 15 years of my life, reduced to a collection of desk trinkets, a worn coffee mug, a framed photo of my late wife, a slightly wilted desk plant, and a handful of industry awards that now seemed like relics from another civilization. The collective gaze of 200 employees followed me as I walked the long, open-plan office space toward the elevators. It was a humiliating gauntlet. At the front of the room, standing on a small, portable stage, was Michael Sterling, the new CEO. He had a microphone in his hand and a smirk on his face that was far too wide for his narrow features. Beside him, Karen, our head of HR, watched my departure with the placid satisfaction of a cat who had just pushed a vase off a shelf. Michael had just concluded his triumphant new vision, all-hands meeting, by making an example of me. "We need to be agile, hungry, and forward-thinking," he declared, his voice tinny through the cheap PA system. "That means shedding some of our legacy weight, the old ways of thinking that hold us back. We need new blood, fresh ideas." Then he had looked directly at me, sitting in the third row. "David, we appreciate your years of service, but your position has been made redundant. Karen has your things." Just like that, in front of everyone. The man whose first computer I had set up when he was a pimply teenager, whose network passwords I had reset a dozen times, had just jettisoned me like a piece of obsolete hardware. My name is David Miller, 48 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the senior systems architect for Sterling Vance Financial. I wasn't just an employee. I was the architect. I built this place. Not the physical walls, but every digital system within them. When Michael's father, the original Mr. Sterling, started this company from a two-room office, he'd hired me, a hungry 33-year-old with a knack for network infrastructure. I designed their first server rack. I wrote their first cybersecurity protocols. I laid every single cable, configured every router, and built the proprietary trading and client management software from the ground up. The entire multi-billion-dollar nervous system of Sterling Vance Financial was a product of my design, my labor, my sleepless nights. It was secure, stable, and redundant, built to withstand anything. I had built a fortress, and the founder's son, who had inherited the keys to the kingdom 6 months ago after his father retired to the Bahamas, had just mocked me and cast me out. As I waited for the elevator, the silence in the office was broken by a smattering of nervous applause for Michael. It was a loyalty test, and everyone knew it. I didn't look back. I just stared at the brushed steel doors, my expression unreadable. I felt a surge of something cold and sharp, but it wasn't anger. Not yet. It was the detached, analytical focus that always came over me when a complex system had failed. And this was a system failure on a human level. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside, the box in my arms. The doors closed, and the muffled sound of Michael's voice disappeared. Alone in the descending car, I looked at my reflection in the polished steel. I didn't look defeated. I looked thoughtful. Michael Sterling saw me as a relic, a dinosaur. Karen saw me as a problem that had been efficiently solved. They saw a quiet, middle-aged man who wouldn't make a fuss. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was the nature of the fortress I had built. I had designed it to protect the company from threats from the outside, but I'd also built in contingencies, obscure, undocumented diagnostic backdoors and monitoring tools that only I knew existed. They weren't malicious. They were my emergency access, my way of analyzing the system's health from the deepest, most fundamental level if all other access was lost. They were my creation, my signature, woven into the very source code of the company. Michael had just fired the architect, but he had forgotten that the architect always keeps a set of master blueprints and a hidden key. I walked out of the gleaming lobby and into the afternoon sun. I didn't go to a bar to drown my sorrows. I went home. I set the cardboard box down in my study, made a pot of strong, black coffee, and sat down at my personal computer. The fortress was still my fortress, and I had a distinct feeling that the greatest threat to Sterling Vance Financial was no longer on the outside. It was sitting in the CEO's chair. My termination wasn't just an ending. It was a new project. I created a new encrypted drive on my machine. I named the folder Project Ozymandias. The first 24 hours were a test of patience. I didn't touch anything. I let the dust settle. I knew there would be a flurry of activity on the network, as my accounts were deactivated, my permissions revoked. The new IT team Michael had brought in, a group of slick young consultants who talked about synergy and the cloud as if they'd invented them, would be clumsily trying to map the territory I had commanded for 15 years. They would be like toddlers trying to operate a nuclear submarine. I spent the day tending to my garden and organizing my garage. It was methodical, calming work that allowed my mind to process. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a crystalline clarity. The humiliation of the public firing was a data point. It told me everything I needed to know about Michael Sterling. He wasn't just incompetent, he was arrogant. And arrogance creates vulnerabilities. Arrogant people don't check their work. They assume they're the smartest person in the room and that the old systems built by the dinosaur are simple and easily managed. On the second night, at 2 a.m., I decided it was time to check the locks. I booted up a hardened, anonymized operating system from a thumb drive, routed my connection through a series of offshore virtual private networks, and opened a secure terminal. I wasn't a hacker trying to break in. I was the landlord, using a key I had forged myself a decade ago. It was a maintenance account buried deep in the Linux kernel of the primary domain controller. Its username was a string of hexadecimal characters corresponding to the birthdate of the physicist James Clerk Maxwell. Its password was the last sentence of a long-dead poet's final letter. It was absurdly obscure, completely undocumented, and I hadn't used it in years. I typed in the credentials. The cursor blinked. Then, the prompt appeared. Root access. I was in. A quiet, grim satisfaction settled over me. It was like slipping into a familiar coat. From this vantage point, I had godlike visibility over the entire network, from the CEO's desktop to the lowest-level intern's email. But I didn't start snooping. That would be clumsy. A professional doesn't rummage. A professional observes. I started by checking the system logs, specifically the logs pertaining to the deactivation of my own accounts. The new IT team had been thorough, but superficial. They deleted my primary user account, my admin privileges, my email. But they hadn't scrubbed my digital footprint. They hadn't seen the tendrils I had woven into the system's core. They had painted over the front door, not realizing I was already inside, watching from a hidden camera. I spent the next few hours setting up my observation post. I wrote a series of small, elegant scripts. They were designed to be invisible, consuming negligible resources and mimicking the background chatter of normal system processes. One script would mirror all of Michael Sterling's network traffic to a hidden, encrypted partition on a forgotten backup server. Another would do the same for Karen, the HR manager. A third script was more sophisticated. It was a keyword trigger packet sniffer that would flag and log any internal communications that contained terms like restructuring, acquisition, data breach, or the names of the board members. It was the digital equivalent of bugging their offices, but far more comprehensive and completely silent. A flashback came to me then, sharp and clear. It was about 5 years ago. Old Mr. Sterling, Michael's father, had called me into his office. He was a stern, practical man, but he respected expertise. David, he'd said, gesturing to a newspaper headline about a massive corporate data breach at another firm. Could this happen to us? It could happen to anyone, Mr. Sterling, I had replied. But we are as protected as we can be. The fortress is strong. The real threat is never just from the outside. It's from carelessness or malice on the inside. At that moment, Michael, then a junior VP with more hair gel than sense, had swaggered into the office. Dad, David's being paranoid. We're a financial firm, not the NSA. All this security just slows things down. We need to be nimble. His father had given him a withering look. My entire life's work, my name, is tied up in this company's reputation, Michael. Reputation is built on trust, and trust is built on security. You would do well to listen to the man who built the walls. Michael had sulked out of the room. He hadn't forgotten that exchange. His public firing of me was, in part, his petty revenge for that moment, a demonstration that he was in charge now, and his father's dinosaur was no longer needed. He thought he was tearing down my legacy. But he was only proving my point. The greatest threat was now on the inside. And the man who built the walls was going to watch him, brick by digital brick, as he began to tear them down himself. I let my scripts run, silently gathering data, and closed the connection. The long game had begun. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew one thing about systems, whether they are digital or human. Under stress and mismanagement, they always reveal their hidden flaws. And Michael Sterling was a one-man stress test. For a full week, I did nothing but watch the data flow in. It was like being a biologist observing a new, chaotic ecosystem. The hidden partition on the backup server I'd chosen as my digital dead drop was filling up with neatly organized logs of everything Michael and Karen were doing. It was mostly mundane at first. Emails about synergy and new corporate letterhead. Memos about the new open door policy that was really just an excuse for Michael to wander around and intimidate people. Karen was busy drafting new employment contracts that removed many of the protections the older employees had enjoyed. It was petty, predictable corporate maneuvering. But I'm a patient man. I've spent countless hours staring at code, looking for a single misplaced semicolon that's bringing down an entire system. I know how to filter out the noise and wait for the signal. The first significant signal appeared late one night, buried in the logs from the company's accounting software. Michael had approved an invoice. It was from a new vendor I'd never heard of, NextGen Synergy Solutions, LLC. The invoice was for $75,000 for strategic IT consultation and infrastructure review. My first thought was that this was the consulting firm that had taken my place. But the name sounded off. It was a meaningless buzzword salad. A real tech firm has a real name. I dug deeper. The packet sniffer I'd planted had captured the data stream when Michael accessed the vendor payment portal. I was able to see the routing and account numbers for NextGen Synergy Solutions. Then I did some simple, open-source intelligence work. The corporate registration for NextGen was public record. The company had been formed just 3 months ago. The address listed for its headquarters was a P.O. box in a neighboring state. There was no website, no public presence. The registered agent for the LLC was a man named Leo Vance. The name didn't ring a bell, but a quick cross-reference on social media provided the connection. Leo Vance was Michael's old college roommate. His public profile was a cringe-worthy collection of photos of him on yachts, in expensive clubs, and posing with rented sports cars. He listed his profession as entrepreneur/investor. It was the classic profile of a man who did nothing of substance. So, Michael had created a shell company with his old buddy, was submitting fake invoices for consulting services that were never rendered, and was paying his friend, and almost certainly himself, via a kickback, directly for the company coffers. $75,000 was just the first payment. It was embezzlement. Clean, simple, and incredibly arrogant. He hadn't even tried to hide it well, assuming no one would ever look. He assumed the person who would look, the person who knew the accounting system inside and out, was gone. I meticulously documented every step. I took screenshots of the invoice, the payment authorization log with Michael's digital signature, the corporate registration for NextGen, and Leo Vance's public connection to Michael. I compiled it all into a single, encrypted file and placed it in my Project Ozymandias folder. It was a solid, prosecutable case of fraud, but it felt small. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. Taking Michael down for skimming $75,000 felt like arresting a crime boss for tax evasion. It was satisfying, but it didn't address the larger disease that he represented. This was just a symptom. I needed to find the cancer. I kept watching. The key, I knew, would be to understand his ultimate goal. A man like Michael doesn't take over a company his father built just to skim a few $1,000s. He was after something bigger. My keyword sniffer started to get more hits. The term Project Nightingale appeared in a series of emails between Michael and a handful of senior executives he had brought with him. The emails were vague, referring to presentations and due diligence, but never spelling out what Nightingale was. It was a secret, internal project, and whatever it was moving fast. I needed more than just network traffic. I needed to know what was being said in the rooms I couldn't bug. I needed eyes and ears on the inside. It was time to make a call. There was a young IT administrator I had mentored for the last 3 years, a kid named Ben Carter. He was sharp, hardworking, and deeply loyal. I had plucked him from the help desk, seeing his potential, and taught him the ropes of network administration. He was one of the few people who had sent me a private text after the firing, saying how sorry he was and what a sham it had been. He was a risk, but a calculated one. He was my only potential ally inside the fortress. I picked up the phone and dialed his number using a burner app. He answered on the second ring. "Hello, Ben, it's David Miller." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "David, is everything okay? You shouldn't be calling me." "I'm fine, Ben. Listen, I need to ask you for a favor, and you need to listen very carefully before you answer. It's important that you understand the position it might put you in." I had his complete attention. "I'm listening," Ben said, his voice a notch lower, laced with a mix of caution and curiosity. I chose my words with the precision of a programmer writing critical code. I couldn't reveal my full access. That would expose us both. I had to frame it as a well-founded suspicion. "Ben, when I left, I had some concerns about the security posture under the new leadership. I'm worried that things are being overlooked. Not just standard protocols, but bigger things. I've been doing some outside research, and I've seen some red flags related to new vendor contracts. I have reason to believe that Michael Sterling is not acting in the company's best interest." I let that hang in the air. It was the truth, but a carefully curated version of it. "You were right to be concerned," Ben said, his voice tight with frustration. "It's a disaster, David. The new consultants are clueless. They disabled half of your intrusion detection protocols because they were generating too many alerts. They're prioritizing speed over safety. Michael wants every project pushed through yesterday. It's chaos." This was better than I'd hoped. He wasn't just willing to listen. He was already on my side. "Ben, I need information that I can't get from the outside," I continued. "I need to know what's happening in meetings. I need to know about a project they're calling Project Nightingale. Can you help me?" There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, weighing the risk. He was a young man with a career ahead of him. Helping me could get him fired, blacklisted. "Why are you doing this, David?" he asked, a fair question. "Are you just trying to get revenge?" "Revenge is a part of it, I won't lie," I admitted. Honesty was crucial here. He humiliated me. But it started as revenge, and it's turning into something else. It's my work, Ben. My life's work. I built that place to be strong and secure. I feel responsible for it. It's like watching someone take a sledgehammer to a house you built. And more than that, I respected Mr. Sterling Sr.'s name is on the door. Michael is dragging it through the mud. If what I suspect is true, he's putting the entire company and all its clients at serious risk. My words resonated. Ben, like me, was a builder, a protector of systems. He understood the violation of it all. "Okay," he said, his voice firm now. "Okay, David, I'm in. What do you need?" We spent the next half hour establishing a secure communication protocol. We would use an encrypted messaging app with disappearing messages. He would be my source for human intelligence, the things that never cross the network, the whispers in the hallway, the mood in the boardroom, the documents printed for physical meetings. His first task was simple: find out everything he could about Project Nightingale. A few days later, a message from Ben appeared on my secure app. "Found something. There was a closed-door meeting today. Michael, the VPs, and 2 guys in suits I didn't recognize. I was called in to fix a projector issue." On the screen was a presentation. The title was Project Nightingale, a strategic acquisition proposal by Innovest Capital. The message vanished after I read it. Innovest Capital. I'd heard of them. They were a ruthless private equity firm known for hostile takeovers. They buy a company, strip it for parts, lay off most of the staff, and sell the husk for a quick profit. Michael wasn't just running the company into the ground. He was planning to sell it to the wolves. This was his endgame. Suddenly, his actions made a terrifying kind of sense. The flashy spending, the fake invoices, that was just him enjoying the perks while he could. Firing me and the other senior staff wasn't just about ego. It was about removing anyone who might raise a flag or ask difficult questions during the due diligence process. The new, incompetent IT team wouldn't know where the bodies were buried. Disabling the security protocols wasn't just laziness. It was to ensure that any existing problems remained hidden. He was actively trying to make the company look clean for a quick sale, even if it meant making it dangerously vulnerable. But what was he hiding? A company like Sterling Vance would undergo a rigorous technical audit before any acquisition. Innovest Capital, for all their ruthlessness, were not stupid. Michael had to be covering up something big, something that a standard audit might miss if the auditors didn't know exactly where to look. I redirected my focus. I started a deep forensic dive into the servers, not just the active ones, but the archived logs and backup tapes going back a year. I was looking for a ghost, an event that had happened, been logged, and then been deliberately erased. It took me 3 solid days of nonstop work. I wrote a script to compare the checksums of archived logs against their original values, looking for any evidence of modification. On the 3rd day, I found it. A discrepancy in the logs for a primary client database server. The log file from 6 weeks ago, before Michael had taken over, but after his father had announced his retirement, was a few kilobytes smaller than its archived mirror. Someone had gone in and deleted a specific set of entries. Using a suite of forensic data recovery tools, I began the painstaking process of rebuilding the deleted log entries from the raw data on the disk platter. It was like reassembling a shredded document. And late one night, surrounded by empty coffee cups, I found it. A series of alerts from the intrusion detection system I had built. The alerts were clear: unauthorized access detected from foreign IP address. Mass data exfiltration in progress. Alert: client PI database accessed. It was a data breach, a major one, and it had happened on the old guard's watch, but right at the transition of power. And a check of the state and federal notification portals showed it had never been reported. They had covered up. This was the cancer. And Michael wasn't just a willing participant in the cover-up. He was leveraging it for his own multi-million-dollar payday. This changed everything. It was no longer about embezzlement or petty revenge. It was about a massive criminal conspiracy that put thousands of clients' financial lives at risk. My quiet, methodical investigation had just uncovered a ticking time bomb. The discovery of the data breach and its cover-up shifted the entire axis of my project. The quiet satisfaction I'd felt at uncovering Michael's petty fraud evaporated, replaced by a cold, urgent anger. This was a profound betrayal of everything I had built and everything his father, Mr. Sterling Sr., had stood for. The company's reputation, its legal standing, and the financial security of its clients were all being sacrificed for Michael's greed. My mission was no longer personal. It was a duty. I had to expose this, not just to punish Michael, but to cauterize the wound before the entire company bled out. My first step was to understand the full scope of the breach. The recovered logs gave me the timeline and the point of entry, but not the payload. I needed to know exactly what data the attackers had taken. I focused my forensic tools on the compromised database server. The attackers had been sophisticated, using techniques to mask their tracks, but they weren't perfect. No one is. They had left behind fragments, residual data in the server's memory caches, and unallocated disk space. For a week, I was a digital archaeologist, painstakingly piecing together the ghost of the stolen data. The picture that emerged was devastating. The attackers had exfiltrated the Know Your Customer database. This contained not just names and addresses, but social security numbers, dates of birth, copies of driver's licenses, and detailed financial profiles for over 15,000 of the firm's high-net-worth clients. It was a treasure trove for identity thieves and black market data brokers. It was, without exaggeration, a company-killing breach. If this became public before the company could control the narrative and notify its clients, the ensuing lawsuits and regulatory fines would be catastrophic. The acquisition by Innovest Capital would be dead on arrival, and the company's value would plummet to near zero. Michael wasn't just hiding a problem. He was sitting on a nuclear bomb and trying to sell the silo. His plan was clear: rush the sale to Innovest, get his payout, and be long gone before the inevitable discovery. He was likely hoping the breach would be discovered under Innovest's ownership, leaving them to deal with the fallout. It was a plan of breathtaking cynicism. I now had 2 parallel streams of evidence: Michael's act of fraud, the fake invoices, and the historic covered-up data breach. I needed to weave them together into a single, inescapable narrative. My next message to Ben was precise. Ben, I need you to find any and all internal documentation related to the Innovest Capital deal. Memos, emails, presentation drafts. Especially anything related to the data room for due diligence. Be careful. This is critical. Ben came through 2 days later. He found a memo from Michael to the head of the new IT consulting team. It was an instruction list for setting up the virtual data room for Innovest technical auditors. The instructions were specific. The auditors were to be given access only to a sanitized copy of the main servers. Certain log directories were to be excluded from the data set. It was a smoking gun. It was a written order to deliberately mislead the acquiring party's auditors. I now had a complete chain of evidence. The breach itself, the log showing it was covered up, and now a direct order from the CEO to continue the deception during an acquisition process. I began compiling my final report. It wasn't a document of revenge. It was a formal, cold, and professional security audit and forensic analysis. I used the same template I would have used if I were still an employee. It was over 100 pages long, filled with screenshots, log excerpts, network diagrams, and financial traces. It had 3 main sections. Section 1, Active Financial Misappropriation. This detailed the next-gen Synergy Solutions fraud, complete with bank records, corporate filings, and a clear link between Michael and his college roommate. It was the appetizer. Section 2, Undisclosed Critical Security Incident of Q2. This was the main course. It laid out the evidence of the data breach in excruciating detail. I included the recovered logs, the analysis of the exfiltrated data, and an estimate of the potential financial and legal liability, citing specific federal and state laws that had been broken by the failure to disclose. I calculated the potential fines to be in the tens of millions of dollars. Section 3. Willful Deception and M&A Due Diligence. This was the kill shot. It included Michael's memo about the sanitized data room, proving a deliberate, ongoing conspiracy to defraud Innovest Capital and the company's own shareholders. I concluded the report with a simple summary, that the current leadership was engaged in active embezzlement while simultaneously concealing a catastrophic liability, all in service of a fraudulent corporate sale. The company was facing existential threats from both internal corruption and external consequences. The report was a weapon of immense power. A single email could send it to the SEC, the FBI, and the board of directors. But a public detonation was still too risky. It could trigger a panic, hurt the clients further, and destroy the company before the damage could be contained. And I still felt a duty to the man who had given me my start. Old Mr. Sterling deserved to hear it first. He deserved the chance to save the company he had built. He was the chairman of the board, and it was his ultimate responsibility. I had to find a way to present this to him directly, without Michael running interference. I went to the company's public website and found the list of the board of directors. I knew most of them by name. They were old-school business titans, friends of Mr. Sterling Sr. They were not tech-savvy. An email from a disgruntled ex-employee would likely be dismissed and forwarded to Michael, tipping my hand. I needed a different approach. I needed to leverage my own history with the company. I drafted a carefully worded email, not to the whole board, but to Mr. Sterling Sr.'s personal assistant, a woman who had been with him for 30 years. My subject line was simple, urgent, follow-up on a conversation from 2018. I knew she would remember me, and the subject was just odd enough to bypass the usual filters. The email read, "Dear Eleanor, I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to you as a matter of extreme urgency regarding the long-term structural integrity of the company's data infrastructure, a topic Mr. Sterling and I discussed at length some years ago. A new and time-sensitive external threat has emerged, which I believe requires his and the full board's immediate attention. For security reasons, I cannot detail this over email. I need a 15-minute slot in the next board meeting to present my findings. I assure you, this is a matter of the highest possible consequence. It was formal, respectful, and leveraged the authority of my past role without sounding like a complaint. It played on the founder's known anxieties about security. Now, all I could do was wait and see if the bait would be taken. For 2 days, there was silence. I resisted the urge to check my email every 5 minutes. I knew that my message to Eleanor, Mr. Sterling Sr.'s assistant, was a delicate gambit. It had to pass through the human firewalls of loyalty and protocol. If she simply forwarded it to Michael, the game was up. He would know someone was on to him, and he would accelerate his plans, perhaps even trying to destroy the evidence I had so carefully gathered. On the morning of the 3rd day, a reply appeared in my inbox. It was from Eleanor. The message was brief and formal. Mr. Miller, Mr. Sterling Sr. thanks you for your diligence. The board is convening this Friday at 10 a.m. You have been added to the agenda for a 15-minute presentation. Please check in at reception. A visitor's pass will be waiting for you. A wave of relief washed over me, so profound it almost made me dizzy. It had worked. I had bypassed Michael and secured a direct audience with the one man who could stop the bleeding. The battlefield was chosen. Now I had to prepare the ordnance. I spent the next 48 hours rehearsing my presentation. I didn't just have the 100-page report. I converted the key findings into a crisp, clear slide deck. I knew my audience. They were not technologists. They were businessmen who understood risk, liability, and the bottom line. I translated the complex technical details into simple, powerful visuals. A flowchart showing the money flowing from Sterling Vance to the shell company owned by Michael's friend. A map of the world showing the foreign IP address that had accessed their server with a bright red arrow pointing to their headquarters. A simple bar chart showing the number of clients whose social security numbers were now in the hands of criminals. The most important slide was the last one. It was just a number written in a large, bold font. The estimated total financial liability. It was a conservative estimate, combining the regulatory fines for non-disclosure, the cost of credit monitoring for 15,000 clients, and the projected legal fees from the inevitable class action lawsuits. The number had 8 zeros in it. On Friday morning, I put on my best suit. It felt strange, like putting on an old uniform. As I drove downtown, I felt a detached calm. There was no room for anger or vindictiveness in what I was about to do. This was a clinical procedure. I was a surgeon about to excise a tumor. I arrived at the Sterling Vance Tower and walked into the lobby. It was the first time I'd been back since the day I was fired. The receptionist, a young woman who had always been kind to me, did a subtle double-take but smiled politely and handed me my visitor's pass. "They're waiting for you on the 40th floor, Mr. Miller. Good to see you again." "You too, Sarah," I said. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was a journey into the heart of the machine I had built. When the doors opened, I was met by Eleanor. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and an impeccable demeanor. She gave me a look that was a complex mixture of curiosity and concern. "David," she said, shaking my hand. "It's good of you to come." "He's concerned. He should be," I said quietly. She led me to the main boardroom. The door was a massive slab of dark mahogany. I could hear the low murmur of voices from within. My heart was beating a steady, deliberate rhythm. This was it, the culmination of weeks of silent, painstaking work. Eleanor opened the door, and I stepped inside. The room was exactly as I remembered it. A long, polished table surrounded by a dozen high-backed leather chairs. At the head of the table sat Mr. Sterling Sr. He looked older than I remembered, his face etched with the weariness of a man forced out of a peaceful retirement. To his right sat Michael. When Michael saw me, his face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions. First, utter shock, then confusion, then a flash of anger, quickly masked by a condescending smirk. He leaned over and whispered something to his father, probably that I was a disgruntled employee on a fool's errand. The other board members, a collection of silver-haired men in expensive suits, looked at me with bored indifference. I was an unexpected interruption in their day. "David," Mr. Sterling Sr. said, his voice a low rumble. "We've given you 15 minutes. The floor is yours." I nodded. I walked to the head of the table, inserted a USB drive into the presentation laptop, and my first slide appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was a simple title, a report on critical infrastructure vulnerabilities and unmitigated liabilities at Sterling Vance Financial. Michael rolled his eyes, a theatrical gesture for the rest of the board. He leaned back in his chair, confident and dismissive. He thought he was about to watch a pathetic plea for my old job. He had no idea he was about to watch a live autopsy of his career. I took a deep breath and began to speak. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for your time. For 15 years, my job was to protect this company's digital assets. I am here today because that protection has failed. My voice was calm and measured, carrying across the silent boardroom. I started with the familiar, the foundation of my credibility. As you know, the core of this company is its data. Client trust is our most valuable asset. For years, we built a fortress to protect that asset. This presentation is a structural survey of the damage that fortress has sustained. I saw Michael whisper something to the board member next to him, who chuckled softly. They were still treating this as a joke. My first slide after the title was a simple organizational chart. On one side was Sterling Vance Financial. On the other was a box labeled NextGen Synergy Solutions, LLC. A red line connected them, labeled $75,000 payment for strategic consultation. I began my investigation by looking into new, high-value vendor contracts. I explained, NextGen Synergy Solutions was registered 3 months ago to a P.O. box. It has no employees and no business history. My next click brought up a new box, Leo Vance, registered agent. Another click, and a photo of Leo and Michael with their arms around each other, taken from a public social media profile, appeared on screen. Leo Vance is the college roommate of our current CEO. This payment of $75,000 and 2 subsequent payments for similar amounts represent a clear and fraudulent misappropriation of company funds. The mood in the room shifted slightly. The board indifference began to fade, replaced by flickers of interest. This was language they understood. Fraud. Embezzlement. Mr. Sterling Sr.'s eyes narrowed, fixing on his son. Michael was no longer smirking. His face was tight. "This is outrageous," he blurted out. "This is a baseless accusation from a bitter ex-employee. All of this is public record." I replied without looking at him, my focus on the board. "The corporate filings and the payment records from your own accounting system are irrefutable. But this," I said, clicking to the next slide, "is just a symptom of a much larger problem." The slide was titled, Undisclosed Critical Security Incident. I laid out the timeline of the data breach, using simple graphics. The date, the time, the server affected. 6 weeks before Mr. Sterling Sr.'s retirement became effective, our primary client database was breached by a foreign entity. The attackers successfully exfiltrated the personal and financial data of 15,212 clients. A collective, sharp intake of breath went around the room. The silence was now heavy, menacing. This breach was logged by the security systems I designed. However, the incident was never reported to regulatory bodies, nor were the affected clients notified. The log files were then deliberately altered to hide the event. "That's a lie," Michael said, his voice rising. "No such breach ever occurred. Our systems are secure." "Are they?" I asked, finally turning to look at him. My analysis of the server's raw disk data allowed me to recover the original, unaltered logs. This is a fragment of what was stolen. The next slide was a redacted, but still terrifying, sample of the data. Names, birth dates, and the last 4 digits of social security numbers. It was horrifyingly real. Mr. Sterling Sr. looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. His face was pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Why was this not brought to my attention?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet, directed at his son. "Because it never happened, Dad," Michael insisted, his voice cracking with desperation. "He's making this up. He's a hacker. He probably faked these logs himself." "My final point addresses the ongoing nature of this deception," I said, ignoring his outburst and advancing to the final section. The slide read, Project Nightingale and Willful Deception. The company is currently in acquisition talks with Innovest Capital. As part of the due diligence process, The acquiring party must perform a technical audit. I then displayed a perfect, high-resolution image of the internal memo Michael had sent to the IT consultants. His instructions to provide a sanitized data set to the auditors, with specific log directories excluded, were highlighted in red. This is a direct, written order from the CEO to actively defraud a potential buyer by concealing a known, catastrophic liability. This act, in and of itself, constitutes criminal fraud and exposes every single member of this board to significant personal and corporate liability. The room was funereal. The board members were no longer looking at me. They were all staring at Michael, their faces masks of cold fury and dawning horror. They were calculating their own exposure, the lawsuits, the damage to their own reputations. I had turned his allies into his judges. Michael stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He's a criminal. He illegally accessed our systems. You can't listen to him. Arrest him. I didn't flinch. I turned to Mr. Sterling Sr. I used a deep-level diagnostic account that I created a decade ago to ensure the health of the system. I did it to protect the company your father built, the company you are now running, and the company whose name you bear, Mr. Sterling. The information I presented was obtained to prevent a catastrophe. The evidence is on this encrypted drive. I placed the USB stick on the polished table. My 15 minutes are up. Thank you for your time. I turned and walked toward the door, my work done. The fortress had been breached from the inside, but the architect had returned to sound the alarm. The rest was up to them. As I walked out of the boardroom, Eleanor was waiting by the door. She didn't say a word, but she gave me a nod of profound, almost sorrowful respect. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing the board members in with the toxic fallout of my presentation. I didn't wait around. I took the elevator down, walked out of the building, and didn't look back. My part in the drama was over. I had laid the evidence on the table. The execution was now in their hands. The drive home was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant or giddy. I felt a sense of grim closure, the way a surgeon must feel after a long and difficult operation. I had removed the cancer. Now the patient had to heal. I spent the weekend in my garden, pulling weeds and turning over the soil. It was grounding, real work. I fully expected to hear from lawyers or even law enforcement. Michael's accusations of hacking were predictable, but I had been careful. I had used a diagnostic tool I had created as an employee to investigate a threat to the company I was, in my view, still morally obligated to protect. It was a legal gray area, but one I was prepared to defend. The first news came on Monday morning, not from a lawyer, but from a news alert on my phone. The headline was stark: Sterling Vance CEO Michael Sterling and senior staff fired. Acquisition talks halted. The article was short on details, citing a unanimous board decision following an internal review that revealed serious managerial and operational discrepancies. It was the kind of sterile corporate language that screams major scandal. Later that day, I received a personal call. The number was blocked, but I answered it. David, it's Robert Sterling. It was Mr. Sterling Sr. His voice sounded ancient, exhausted. Robert, I said simply. I don't know whether to thank you or have you arrested, he said. And for a moment, I heard a flash of the old, gruff humor. It faded quickly. What you did, it was necessary. You saved the company. You may have also destroyed my family, but you saved my company. The board has engaged an external law firm and a cybersecurity company. They verified everything in your report. The data breach, the cover-up. Michael and his friends, they confessed when presented with the evidence. I'm sorry for your loss, Robert, I said, and I meant it. He's my son, he said, his voice thick with pain. But he is no longer an officer of this company. He will face the consequences, legal and otherwise. There was a long pause. The board has asked me to make you an offer, David. We want you to come back, not as an architect, as Chief Information Security Officer with a seat on the executive committee. Name your price. It was the ultimate vindication. The job, the power, the recognition. Everything I had been denied. I thought about it for a full 10 seconds. I picture myself back in that tower, in those meetings. Robert, I said respectfully, I'm retired. I'm me at this time. He was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. I thought you might say that. Can I persuade you to take on a short-term consulting contract? On your terms. We need you to oversee the cleanup, to guide the new team, to ensure this never happens again. The company needs you, David. I need you. This offer was different. It wasn't a job. It was a mission, a finite project with a clear goal, to rebuild the fortress walls stronger than before and then walk away for good. I'll send you my consulting terms in the morning, I said. My rate was, to put it mildly, astronomical. He accepted it without negotiation. For the next 3 months, I worked not as an employee, but as an outside authority. I was given complete autonomy. I hired a new, fiercely competent IT team, led by Ben Carter, whom I promoted to Director of IT Security. I oversaw the painful but necessary process of client notification. We work with federal agencies to manage the fallout from a breach. We scrapped the acquisition talks and focused on rebuilding trust. Michael Sterling and his cronies, including Karen and Leo Vance, were indicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy. Their public downfall was swift and brutal. I never saw Michael again, but I read that he pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He had lost everything: his job, his reputation, and his father. One of my last acts as a consultant was to sit with Robert Sterling in his office, the same office where he had first asked me if a breach could happen to us. We looked out the window at the city below. You built this company on trust, Robert, I told him. That's the foundation. It's more important than any line of code. I know, he said. A lesson I had to learn twice. Thank you, David. On my last day, I packed up my temporary office. Ben came to see me off. You're really leaving? He asked. My work here is done, I said, shaking his hand. It's your fortress now. Take good care of it. I walked out of Sterling Vance Financial for the second time. There was no cardboard box this time. I left with nothing but the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Revenge, I had learned, is a messy, emotional affair. But justice is a system. It's a series of logical steps, of carefully compiled evidence, of holding people accountable for their actions. What I did wasn't about the humiliation of being fired. It was about restoring order to a system that had fallen into chaos. In my study at home, on a high shelf, sits a small, framed photo of my late wife. Next to it, there's nothing. No industry awards, no mementos. The cardboard box from that day is long gone. I don't need souvenirs to remind me of my career. The greatest structures, I've come to realize, aren't built of steel and code. They're built of integrity. And that's something no one can ever take from you.